Thank you, Don. I appreciate it. This is Bruce Parkman from Mac Parkman Foundation's here, getting ready to tell you an amazing journey that this family's been on after our son decided to go to the ward. And the intent of this webinar is to let you know what we have found out and to talk about what that journey's led us on and what we're doing right now to make sure that we don't have any more Macs. You see the hat on my head? I didn't know what a Rick and Morty thing was until, Mac left to us. Special hello out to our boy Parker, who's attending this thing. He knows what this is. Mr. Meeseeks just got it in the mail, so I had to wear it. But look, man, I really appreciate everybody that's coming here. And the point of this webinar is to finally start our public tour of helping the American public understand what not just happened to our boy Mac Parkman, what is happening to millions of children and hundreds of thousands of adults right now that they'll never reach their full potential and that are struggling every day with mental illness because we all made I'll call it innocent mistakes and ignorance of allowing our kids to play concussive sports while their brains were developing. We have exposed probably the largest gap in parental knowledge and one of the largest pandemics contributing to our mental illness epidemic that's in all over America right now. We are finding, as we will talk, that our entire coroner, medical, psychiatric, athletic trainer, and parental communities have no understanding, no guidance, and no awareness of what contact sports are doing to our kids' brain. We didn't know, and yet here we are, almost 2 years after Mac has left us, to be blessed enough to allow you what God has allowed us to learn on this journey and to share it with you. And that's the whole intent here. And this is the start. We're going to Capitol Hill next week. We're going to talk about the book. We are getting amazing support. I've talked to over 1,000 parents since Mac has left. Parents, coaches, pastors, athletes. Not one person has said that our position on delaying contact sports until high school, which I personally think should be 18. You're an adult. You already know you're going to hurt yourself. Go for it. But we as parents have an obligation to protect our children. And this is all about spreading that awareness and educating the public to adapt, change, and affect change to protect our future generations and to better protect those that have already been hurt and that are suffering. Right now, and I'll make this point once, I'll make a point at the end, we cannot even remotely calculate the amount of human potential that has been lost to this situation. How many leaders, politicians, chemists, discoveries were not made because these young children are either no longer here or are not operating at the full potential that the Lord intended them to reach because they got hurt. And so let's get into Mac's story. Let's talk about what happened to our boy and how much we love him every day. And then let's talk about what we've learned and how important it is to let parents know that we just can't keep doing this, that there are alternate forms of sports and health and recreation, that non-contact sports, flag football, touch rugby, no-head soccer, no-check hockey, all these are good. Sports is supposed to be healing. Sports is supposed to be what we want for our kids to be healthy and all that. It's not supposed to hurt them. So let's get into this story, and please stay with me on this journey. John, next slide, please. So what we decided to do is in the name of, and make sure I can see these slides, bro. Here we go. So what we did is entitled this is What Happened to Mac, man? We know that so many of you outside of that horrible day and the horrible aftermath and the love that you have given our family are wondering what happened to this boy. I haven't been blogging for 6 months because I've written a book and we haven't been out there the way we wanted to. So we entitled this What Happened to Mac because over 1,000 people showed up to his service and all of them had questions just like we did. And we know that day, that horrible day when, and we just didn't know. But we know who our Mac was, man. Mac was everything you see on the slide. He was the best of us. He was my son, and I tried to be like him every day. Look at these characteristics that everybody knows. We're embedded in this young man. And he's not here. And I don't know what that one's all about. Sorry, technology and me are not friends. So, but this boy's not here, and he should be here. And guess what? He's not the only one. He's not the only one. And that's what our mission is. Our God-given mission is to inform, educate, and publicize and take on everybody that thinks that these sports are good for kids. I didn't know, and I'm paying for it, man. And we're going to fix this. But this is our Mac, man. We all know him. But next slide, Don. On the 24th of September, he decided to leave us. He was tormented. I will not go into his last video. Some of you saw it. But when I finally watched it, I saw one of the most tired young men at 17. A young man who for 3 years was struggling with schizophrenia and depression to a point where he could not be here. A child that had everything, love. He had the Lord. He had, we did vacations. He's been around the world a lot. Egypt and scuba diving in Tahiti and Australia, New Zealand and the UAE. And we took so many family vacations. He was blessed. And all of his friends, his gaming friends, his sports friends, his academic friends, his school friends, his childhood friends, he left us all behind. Can you imagine the amount of pain it takes to walk all the way up to the top of that cliff? He made his video in the parking lot, walked up to the top of that cliff, and he was so committed, he posted it and took 39 steps and launched himself off that cliff. That's how much pain Mac Parkman was at. And that stone is what my wife and I carved at the base of that cliff. You guys can walk up there, find it. And that church, in 2 hours, we are finally putting Mac home. That is his final home, his resting place on Anna Maria Island, where you can all come visit him. But we needed to learn from that day, because at that day, I was clueless. All I knew is that I was the last guy to see my son. I hugged him and kissed him like I always did. I told him, man, they're great to say. He said, I will, Dad. And, the next day, I don't have a son. And I needed to learn, and I have learned. And now we need to spread the word, because I don't want anybody here to not go through with their own child. I don't want you to know anybody to go through what we've been going through as a family, because it is 100% preventable. All these children do not need to go. All these children do not need to suffer. All the adults that have played sports. Heck, I got a lot of rugby friends like me, man. I'm 60 years old. I'm starting to get some woo. I can't remember where I was 5 minutes ago, but it's got to stop. It's got to stop. Next slide there, Don. And from that point, I went on a journey. I had to find out what happened to my son. I wanted to know. I didn't know if it was Satan, if it was porn, if it was the internet, if it was a girlfriend. I had no idea. All I knew was my son was missing. And at that time, that's when God started entering into my life and helping me out. So the first part is right after September, I had to wait for the coroner's call. And he called me and we talked, and he said, I'm sorry, but Mac left you. And I'm like, all right. I said, let me ask you this. Why is a child that was loved, that never knew emotional or physical or abuse, never knew neglect, he had a few dollars in his pocket, he had an FJ, he was adored by so many people, he was loved. Why it was not, is our son not here? His next question was the one thing that got us to this point right here. He asked me, did he ever have a concussion? And I said, well, yeah, he had 3, but he never lost. They were moderate and mild. He never lost consciousness. He was cleared. They happened in 3 different seasons. I said, his last one was 3 years ago. It was in 2017. And I know that because I sent an email to the athletic director wanting to know how many concussions can my son have, and I'm done with this stuff. He never had another concussion. He says, well, I started a CTE exam. I said, what's that? He said, chronic traumatic encephalopathy. I said, what is that? He goes, the NFL disease. I said, what does that have to do with a 17-year-old? He goes, well, he played sports. I don't know. He says, I don't have the tools, but you might want to check into it. And I thanked him profusely. That one corner, that maybe 1 to 5% of the corners that know what CTE is, we were blessed enough for him to take a look at Mac. So I dialed up CTE. I find the Patrick Wisha Foundation. I just left a message. I'm crying. I said, look, I just lost my son. I just found out he might have this thing. What is this? And they run stopcte.org, an amazing organization. The founder, Karen Kinzel, used to be Karen Rishka, called me up the next day and asked me to tell her Mac's story. I told her Mac's story. She goes, well, what sports did he play? I said, he played everything. He wanted to play rugby, and he wanted to play hockey, and he played wrestling, and he all these sports. I never played these sports, but he just loved being with his friends. And she goes, my God, Bruce, his brain never had a break. And I'm like, what does that mean? She goes, you need to talk to the Concussion Legacy Foundation. That's where my son is, up at the Boston University Center of the Center for Chronic Traumatic Encephalopathy. She put me in touch with Lisa McHale at the Concussion Legacy Foundation. She listened to the same story. She goes, oh my gosh, sent me to BU. BU calls me back. They go, oh man, it sounds like your boy would have made a great donation. But it's been 3 months, and we're so sorry. He's probably interred. Well, what a lot of you don't know is that we had some problems after Mac's passing. We'll just say there was some criminality involved. And up until the coroner's report, we had no idea if there was actual criminal involvement with our boy in his passing. And so at the request of some of the most renowned criminal pathologists in the country, because I was going nuts. I didn't know what happened to my boy. If somebody hurt him, man, I'm going to jail, right? But I still had Mac. You believe that? 3 months later, I was fortunate enough, because those criminals came into my house, and then there's a whole story that we won't go into, but they caused me enough concern where I held on to our boy, and we were able to make a full donation to the CTE plan. So that process kicked off a year. Meanwhile, I started to say, I said, if this is all about kids, and I think there's something here, well, we got to honor Mac. I mean, my boy just can't leave. I want him to be around after I go. I'm just Bruce. So we started the Mac Parkman Foundation after that, and I started doing research. Go back up, Don. I'm almost done with the timeline. And I spent over almost a year looking into depression, schizophrenia, mental illness, concussion. So I read every book, hundreds of research papers, trying to understand what could have left Mac. And what caused Mac to leave. And it was painful, folks, to know that there's information out there as a parent that if I was privy to, my boy would have never touched a football, never touched a hockey puck, never would have done anything, most of the stuff that I allowed him to do in my ignorance. And I decided to write this book. And with the help of my sister and my wife and my family and Dawn and so many people that came in, we were able to go ahead and take the foundation to one of the leading organizations in America right now, educating parents on concussive and subconcussive trauma, while I was able to find time in my schedule to finish this book. September came around, we got the assessment, and Dr. Ann McKee, who is the most renowned CTE researcher in the world, looked at Mac's brain and did not find any CTE. And she told us, I'm not surprised. She says, because we've only found it in one under 17-year-old. Your boy was too young. And I asked her, did you find any changes to his white matter or gray matter? And she said, why would you say that? Because remember, at this time, Boston University was focused on CTE. I said, well, in my research, Dr. McKee, I'm finding out that their subconcussive trauma causes changes to white matter, and these are heavily associated with the types of illnesses that Mac said he had and are symptomatic with the way he left us, the violent way in which he took his life. And she said, let me look deeper. Well, folks, just 3 weeks ago, we got word that they found changes to Mac's white matter. It's a whole different evaluation. So what the story that you're getting ready to hear all ties together. That kids like Mac, their brains are developing. We're going to talk about brain development, brain functionality. We're going to talk about the risks of that brain trauma, how it's linked to mental illness, and what we need to do as a society to take better care of our kids. But that all started with that one coroner asking me, did my son ever have a concussion? Next slide, Don. And so we started the Mac Parkman Foundation, as you're very much aware. We're not scientists, but we are passionate about our boy, and we care about kids. And we want parents and coaches and trainers and psychologists and everybody to know that this condition's out there and it's preventable. And that we can do a lot as a society to make sure that our kids reach their full potential. As soon as a kid puts on football pads, as soon as he puts on a helmet, In any sport that lasts a season and then plays possibly multiple sports or keeps playing the same sport for different organizations, everything that they could have become starts to go downhill. They will never reach that potential. There's studies out there that just one season of football causes significant changes to white matter and or gray matter. These are things that we shouldn't be worried about. We're worried enough about our kids. We got drugs and sex and rock and roll and all these other things we're concerned about. Are they growing up being a good boy, good girl? Are they respectful? Are they kind? Are they generous? Are they loyal? Who needs to worry about brain trauma? Yet, we don't know that we're doing this to our children. Next slide, Don. So, our mission is to serve as a portal of information and resources, doing what we're doing right here, educating. Okay, we're not out here saying, sports are bad, parents are bad. We're not out saying anything other than, look, there's key information that you as a parent need to know in order to better protect your kids. And we'll talk about all the other crazy things you could used to be able to do, but you can't do right now. Well, in the future, you're not going to be able to play concussive sports until you're in high school or maybe 18. Then you can do whatever you want. You're an adult. Join the Army. You can vote. You can play football. Who cares? All right? But up until that point, we have an obligation as a parent to be the most educated, informed person we are. And we know about everything else there is in the world about drugs and different types. We can educate our kids on so much. But how do you educate your kids on something you don't know about? And that's the purpose of the Mac Parkman Foundation. Next slide, Don. And Mac Parkman story is coming to you in about a week on Amazon. We're going to have an ebook ready for you, Youth Contact Sports and Broken Brains. It is the culmination of our journey into Mac's background. It is only a 70-page read, and because I'm a soldier, I read it in 5th grade English. That's right. Anybody can read this. Designed to be read in one airplane trip or 2 nights in bed with a little bowl of kettle corn and just, learning about what you need to tell your kids, what you need to tell about your grandkids, what you need to talk about your friends and your brothers and your sisters, and getting this out there so that we tried to make it for free, but Amazon won't let it. But 100%. Of all the money that comes in from this book, the print version will be $9.99. Will go to the foundation and research. And our family has taken a pledge. We will not touch one dime of this money. This is not a money-making thing at all. But if we're going to be able to grab some money for this book, it's going to Boston University. It's going to every organization that can help us affect legislative, litigational, or change on the streets. And Larry Reyna's, hats off to you, allowed us to, we worked with him to take his tackle rugby team to touch. And they've done an amazing job up there in Seattle. But it's coming to you, and we really appreciate your support. Spread the word of the book. And I don't care if you buy it and give it to 30 people. I don't care if you, just get the word out. That's the intent of the whole thing. Go ahead, Don. So let's start talking about the situation that we found. And one other thing we want to say, we're not against contact sports. I'm a semi-pro rugby player. I still play. As a matter of fact, I'm coming to the Colorado to play in the Aspen's Ruggers Fest, Gentleman's Fest here in September. I'm all about smacking another dude. And I know that contact sports can be a lot of fun, but not when you're a child. So it's not about being against contact sports. It's about, hey, can we wait till they can make up their mind to play it? Or they start contact sports at a point where they can literally just, moderate the damage that could happen to their brain and have a full and impactful life. Because, as I said, you don't want to join our club. Next slide, Don. These are some of the partnerships we've developed over the last couple of years with some of the organizations that we talked. I know that Sheila Stern from the American Brain Coalition's here, Patrick Lucia Foundation's here, Boston University. A lot of those folks are busy. We have folks, other family members from the Concussion Legacy Foundation, Brant McCarthy, 38 Challenge, outstanding young organization, and we're creating more partnerships. We're going to be building partnerships with flag football gear suppliers and all kinds of other awesome organizations like Larry Reese's rugby team out there, rugby program out there, to help get kids away from subconcussive trauma and allow them to live their full potential. Go ahead, Don. So we've got a lot going for us. As of, we've supported some really amazing research. All this research is available. A lot of it's making significant change. We've developed 2 papers with 2 researchers, Alexander Bellatori and Shin Shastrani, amazing neurologists out of the University of Southern California. And we have actually proven that there's a statistical correlation between concussed athletes and developments of new psychological disorders. Okay, this stuff is not being done right now. And this is the kind of research that we're going to continue to support. We have just, we're in the process of signing a contract with Boston University where they're going to digitize every young brain in the brain bank up at BU, and they're going to apply artificial intelligence to determine if there are changes to their white matter. If there are changes to the white matter, and based on what they found of Mac, who was young compared to some of these other male athletes and didn't play football or some of the other more concussive sports as long, we do expect to find this. This is now validation of what we're doing to our children and the correlation to mental illness, the research that we alone have downloaded showing the changes to white matter and the ties to mental illness truly substantiate change to better protect our children. And for all of us, I sure wish we knew this 10 years ago. But we're going to keep pushing on the research. We're working with the American Brain Council. We've got some great projects that we're looking at developing there. And this is what we do now to make sure that Mac stays alive. It is our intent to propose with at least one state by the end of this year a Mac Parkman law banning all contact sports below the age of 14 for children. And we're working to understand what the Concussion Legacy Foundation is and other organizations, and we do believe that we can bring a bill to bear in order to legislate this so that parents don't have to worry about it anymore. Just let your kids go ahead and have fun. But these are some of the things that we're looking at as a foundation to better educate and promote change to protect our young children. Keep going, Don. So let's start talking about the story. And what are the problems with today's contact sports? Well, a lot of it comes from the fact that our kids are starting younger than ever. If you were my age in the 70s and 80s, there was no PE stuff, and you couldn't start. You literally had a high school football team. All right. So, sports wasn't a big deal. It wasn't a way to get up in society. It was very restricted. And I don't think we had the prevalence of mental health issues associated with this we do now. Now, they start at 5 years old. We have had friends talk to friends. We've had people I've talked to that have talked to parents who have taken their kids out of tackle football that day and put them in flag based on the evidence alone that we talked to them and the logic that we displayed to them. Because that's how much we love our kids. Furthermore, we know that a child's brain is not developed until the age of 25. If we traumatically impact that brain while it's developing, the outcome, I will tell you this, folks, is mental illness. You damage that brain, and we'll talk about the prefrontal cortex, okay, you're going to have a child that is going to have problems. So we have to understand, I didn't know this, the brain doesn't develop till 85. I thought that 18, that was the age, right? You can vote, you can join the army, you can do all this stuff. No, at 18, you're still a child up here, especially men. We all know, ladies, that us men are way behind you, ladies, in terms of maturation and just common sense. Well, I mean, that's the reason. We're not yet developed. I mean, we are just not there right now. So, furthermore, coaches, doctors, and parents, they're not trained in subconcussive exposure. They can recognize concussion. Why? Because when the guy gets smacked, the impact is right there. They either get knocked out, they're bouncing around the football field trying to come up, they got their bell ring. Subconcussive trauma is an insidious form of brain trauma. Every little thing, every time a wrestler comes up and grabs you upside the head, every time you come off the line, every time you get hit with a lacrosse stick or checked in hockey, that is a subconcussive hit. Helmets cannot protect that. Okay, so you know, right now, anything that says they can protect against concussions is just not valid. You cannot protect against subconcussive, that's for sure. It might lower a concussive hit to a subconcussive hit, it's still a hit. And we are seeing studies where kids are getting thousands of these in a season. Okay, it is too much for these brains, we'll talk about it. All right, another thing why we want to wait is until high school, kids really don't have fully trained coaches. They're good dads and moms that rod you up. I mean, my wife was a soccer coach. She could barely spell soccer. Her and her other mom, they got promoted one day because the coach quit. Hey, you're the coach, okay? This is what's happening when we're putting people in positions. And what do they revert? They revert back to their childhood. You know, a guy that's teaching a football team, I want my kids to be men, and we're going to play. We're going to hit. He doesn't know anything better. That's what he's doing. He's just trying to do, but he loves the kids. We have to get these kids informed. We talked about how sports seasons go year round now. You can play hockey for the town. You can play hockey for the school. You can play hockey for travel leagues now. And we're taking these concussive sports and we're making the seasons, not one season, in 12 months. That was the problem with Mac. He was a football player from July to November. Then he put on his wrestling shoes till March. And guess what? If there was snow in Breckenridge, man, we were nailing, man. We were up there. It's too much. It's too much. And we're hurting our kids. Next slide, Don. And this is what we're trying to fix. So the key issues that we're going to focus on in the next few slides: neurological development. Our children's brains are young and fragile. They are jello banging around inside of a skull. By exposing them to concussive and subconcussive trauma, we are causing irreversible brain damage, especially over time. And the more young the child is, the more fragile their brain is. They still have so far to go. When we look at that beautiful organ, we'll talk about that in a little bit. We need to increase awareness amongst coaches and doctors. The links between trauma and mental illness has been established. We've got papers going back to 1986. Showing the relationship between schizophrenia and white and gray matter changes like lower synaptic counts. This is the kind of information that needs to be passed on to parents. Subconcussive trauma happens at the microscopic and cellular level. It cannot be diagnosed readily by any technology right now. The CT scans, MRIs can only see so far. They're great for trauma in detecting, do we have a bleed? Do we have rushed up? There is a new technology called diffusion tensor imaging, DTI, that can detect changes in white matter. It's a very promising technology. But right now, when most Americans take their child to a hospital, that doctor will not be able to tell them, hey, your son's was damaging his brain. He can focus on the concussion, and that's pretty much it. The prefrontal cortex, we'll talk about this right here. It's the last part of the brain to develop. This, I think it's the orbital lobes, are the two lobes that's closest to the brain. I mean, the bone right here. This takes the brunt of the hits in concussive sports. And guess what? It's the last part of the brain to develop. It doesn't start till 14 or 15. So if that kid's brain has already been damaged by the time it starts developing, it's not going to develop right, and he or she will never reach their true potential. We have to protect this part of the brain, and we'll dig into that a little bit more. And then that these brain damage can progress over time. I told you, Mac's last concussion was almost 3 years before he took his life. The damage continued. Why? Because of the subconcussive trauma. It never stopped. His brain stayed inflamed. It stayed swollen. We're going to talk about how bad this is and how it prevents proper healing and how it prevents the brain from, the brain never heals back 100%. Once you injure it. You can talk to anybody who's had major concussions, TBIs, been an IED blast in the military, they're never themselves again. And over years of subconcussive trauma, we are impacting these brains where the only outcome is going to be cognitive decline and psychological problems. And who wants that for their child? Nobody. Next slide, Don. So let's dig into it. This is basically follows the outline of our book. So what you see here is what you're gonna see in the book, and we're just gonna cover this real quick. It's very logical, but it's all built to progressively get to the logical conclusion that what we're doing to our children just needs to stop. What I allowed my son to do, I failed my boy. I allowed him to play sports. He wanted to be with his boys. He wanted to do all this stuff. I'm like, all right, man, I want to be a good dad. I came from nothing. I didn't even know what a pair of new shoes was till I joined the Army. I didn't even have a car till I joined the Army. They gave me the keys to an armored personnel carrier. Okay, I wanted my boy to have everything. He wants to play sports, especially like manly sport. Like, let's go, man. I made a mistake that I'll pay for the rest of my life. And this is what it comes down to. So brain structure, let's dial into that, Don. And a disclaimer, I'm not a science teacher, okay? I'm just an old Green Beret trying to do my job here. But let's dig into this. And all this stuff was in the book. Our contributing editor was Dr. Julie Stam. You got to read her book, The Brain on Contact Sports, one of the few books that looks at the brain from a child perspective and talks about in a very, very serious scientific manner. What we're doing to our child's brain. So real basic, you got two sides, two hemispheres of your brain, left side, left brain, right brain, and you see what they control. And you have four major lobes. The frontal lobe is what we're concerned about. Why? Because at the very tip of that purple lobe is the prefrontal cortex, which is right here. So keep that in mind as we go into our little Science Brain 101 journey here. Next slide, Don. As part of the brain, you have a number of neurological components. And actually, in the book, we talk about this first because you can't have a brain without neurological components. So I apologize for this. But the brain has between 860 and 100 billion neurons, okay? Each of those neurons is connected to up to 10,000 other neurons through what's called synapses. You know what that means, folks? That means that the brain, your child's brain, has more neural connections than there are particles in the universe. That comes from Dr. Alan Hamilton, who also reviewed our book and gave us an amazing review on it. Okay, that's what we're messing with. There's over 100,000 miles of myelin in a brain alone. And that myelin is not like it's not like Teflon. It's not like it's not steel or carbon fiber. It's fat. It stretches. It breaks. It tears. So we have nerve cells going through the parts. We have nerve cells. They're the cells that initiate action. They receive the signals and they send the signals. And they send them through the axons. We'll skip the dendrites. We took them out of the book. It's getting a little bit too deep in science there, even for me, the old guy, right? The axons transmit the synapses, and then the synapses connect them to other neurons. And around the axon is myelin. So the three parts that I want you to pay attention to are the two parts. The synapses and the myelin, which covers the axon. Why? Because that right there, with those two components alone, we have dozens of scientific papers correlating damage to synapses and myelin with psychological disorders. And they're all in our book. It's all footnoted. I don't know if we got them all uploaded to our website, but that's what I want you to pay. This is the three things. It is the synapses, myelin, and we'll talk about the prefrontal cortex next. Go ahead, Don. Prefrontal cortex, we already covered a lot of this, but it's right there. It is, I just want you to understand, without a functioning prefrontal cortex, you will not have a child that you basically want to live with, or you're going to watch your child suffer. Okay, that prefrontal cortex controls what's called executive functions. Those executive functions are literally everything that they will need as an adult to function in society. Concrete thought, planning, organizational skills, abstract thought, social interactions, impulsivity, behavioral control are all controlled right here. Well, guess what? Because that's the last part of the brain to develop, most of the damage that can be done by the time that child starts to develop occurs right here. We are creating a monster by exposing not only this fragile brain, but that prefrontal cortex to subconcussive and concussive trauma. We need to protect this. This is our child. One thing I want you to understand about that brain is going to determine everything they become. It determines who they will be, how they will love. It will determine their socioeconomic status. It is all they have between a high quality life and success and a life that they don't want to live. And if we mess with that, that is where we cause way too many problems. And that's what our research has shown us over time. Next slide, Don. And this will get a little bit repetitive, but the brain was not designed to handle repetitive head trauma or repetitive head impacts, or RHI. There's a number of terms for them, but it literally, the brain right now, if it was outside your head, is the consistency of Jell-O. You can't pick it up with your hands. When you see it on a scientific dissection, that they have to put hardeners and chemicals in it to be able to play with it. All right. It's 80-90% water. It's 3% of your body weight. It uses almost 30% of the oxygen energy that your body creates. It is a monster. It is an unbelievable organ that will never, ever be replicated by any computer. I don't care what you think. But it is highly susceptible to damage because it's encased in this bony skull here. There's no cushioning. There's no helmet inside this thing. And when that brain shakes around, the outcomes are always, they're bad. You cannot take something as fragile as this brain, as huge, wonderfully complex. You don't take your laptop and just drop it on the ground every day and pick it up hoping it works. That's just a laptop. This is a brain, an enormously biological complex organ that cannot handle trauma very well. And the pandemic of mental illness that we're discovering in cases like my boy Mac demonstrate that we cannot continuously expose this amazing, beautiful organ to trauma if we want our children to do everything, because we are taking away their future. Next slide, Don. So let's talk about the development of your child. We shift down one, and we'll get back to concussive trauma because this is how the book unfolds. Sorry, Don, made this change on you. This is how the child's developed. Your brain develops. Okay? There was a guy named Piaget back in 18-something, and he came up with basically what is accepted as the 4 stages of development. Okay? And this lasts until the brain develops at the age of 25. The stages that we are concerned about is stage 3 and stage 4, which start about the age of 7 and go all the way until the brain develops. Because these are the higher order brain functions. This is also the time frame when brains start getting exposed to concussive and subconcussive trauma. And that's why, when you look at what is taking place, what they're developing, this is why it's so critical just not to expose the brain to the type of trauma that we're doing through contact sports. Next slide, Don. And during this process, the brain builds myelin. And we talked about how myelin is one of the neurological components. It surrounds the axon. Okay, it's like the insulation on the wire. If you've done the electro and you've been shocked as much as I have with my little, Bob the Builder toolkits, around my house. It is critical to proper nerve function and brain development. A myelinated axon transmits signals 100 times faster than non-myelinated axons. And as it coats itself in myelin, the axon goes from gray to white. That's why we talked about gray, that you've heard about gray matter and white matter. Gray matter is mostly around the skull. White matter is deeper. The gray matter is mostly somas in nerve cells, and the white matter are the axons that connect it to other neurons and axons and neurons and other components deeper into the skull that travel throughout the body. But myelin is crucial to a brain. And next slide, Don. And you just cannot mess with it. You can't break it. You cannot stretch it. And we'll talk about that here in a little bit. Synaptic pruning. Your kid goes through 2 stages of what's called synaptogenesis. Okay, big term. Took me like a year to figure out how to spell it right and pronounce it. So they do one when they're born. And this is where the brain, it just goes through this enormous burst of producing synapses, billions of them. They talking like they produce millions every second, especially as a child. That's how fast their brain's developing. There's a second stage that's very important to us when they become a teenager, and that sets the stage for them to finalize their development into adult. Now, when the brain builds these synapses, the synapses often there's too many of them. As a matter of fact, a child has twice as many synapses as you do as an adult because it goes through a process called synaptic pruning, where the brain rewires itself to be more efficient. Now, a lot of you had your radio, remember the old AM radio, all the noise, right? And all of a sudden you get it all dialed in, and it was you got your AM radio station, okay? The same thing for the brain. Research has shown that autistic children have too many synapses. That's why their brain is always on fire, man. They're just going and going. They have too many synapses. Well, guess what? Schizophrenics, much like Mac, have too few. And that's because of cell death and trauma. And that is research. That actual research, some of the oldest research associating mental illness with trauma goes back to 1984. That's our oldest paper. So that's why we want to be very cognizant of this process as parents. Because if the synaptic pruning process starts, and we start with too few synapses, we're going to end up with even less. And that is associated with psychological disorders and lower cognitive capabilities. Next slide, Don. And let's talk a little bit about my boy's brain, okay? Based on what we know now from Boston University, it is highly probable, and we're almost certain, that Mac played sports from 6 to 17. that the 11 years of him playing these sports interfered with his myelin development, either through impacting it and the synaptic counts. And we're going to have more research done later on this year, as we talked about with Boston University. We're going to fund that study to see if other athletes, along with our son, have the same disorder. Because that now shows from not a CTE perspective, which, is, all right, then CTE really manifests itself in older populations, that children and kids in their 20s that have problems with their myelin, and we can show this through DTI now, it's brain damage. And if we can validate that, then we have now more scientific evidence to affect change and get parents just to stop their kids from playing these sports until their brain is ready, or maybe not playing them at all. Go swimming, camping, archery, running, all kinds of other fun stuff. Go ahead, Don. So now we're going to talk about concussive and subconcussive trauma. A lot of surprises here. As you know, I did my research. I didn't know a lot of this, and that's why I feel it's so important for parents to know, because it does make sense. Go ahead, Don. Next slide. First of all, we all know what a concussion is. All right, it's considered a traumatic brain injury. Most concussions are what's called an MTBI, a mild traumatic brain injury, which is basically that bag of jello called the brain is being shaken as we bounced it against the skull, against both sides of the skull, as we'll talk about. But when it bounces, you can bounce it linearly, which means you take it head on, or rotationally, when you get hit from the side. Rotationally causes even more damage than just a linear blow. But all that damage it does to the axons, we'll talk about the damage that it does. But there's a myth out there that concussions, you have to be unconscious to really have a bad concussion. All concussions are bad. All concussions damage the brain. And now we know that prolonged subconcussive trauma is even worse. They are serious injuries. And you should see a doctor right after hospital. And I think most of the protocols that we'll talk about later on, or that's in the book and on our website, no 2 weeks, man. You know your child better than anybody. You take that child out for as long as you think is possible and go see a concussion specialist, of which there really are not. We didn't even know there was something like that when Mac got his first concussion. And trauma is trauma. And that's what correlates the research that we're finding with what we're finding out happens in our children. I don't care if I punch you in the head, you get in a car wreck, or you get tackled on a football field or on a rugby field, or you get checked in hockey, or you head the ball in soccer. The same amount of force from the same angle produces the same type of trauma in the skull. G-force is G-force. Trauma is trauma. Go ahead, Don. And you'll see that a lot of our research is focused on adults because nobody wants to practice this stuff on children. But when you take what happens to an adult brain and you apply it to a developing brain, you have a much larger project. We have significant research showing that developing brains, and we can talk about brain plasticity all you want, brain plasticity cannot overcome the effects of severe concussive and subconcussive trauma. It cannot heal the brain. And a developing brain has even less plasticity and ability to heal than an adult one, because it's still developing. It still has a way to go. It might be able to heal itself physiologically, but all the neurological damage that is taking place, it'll never heal back to where it was. But did you know that there's 4 injuries when you have a concussion? I didn't know this. You have the primary one where you get the hit and the brain bounces against the skull. Then you have the secondary one where it bounces off the back or side to side. 2 injuries. Both those injuries are accompanied by what's called secondary injuries, where the brain releases an enormous amount of chemicals and free radicals, and it swells and it pushes blood to the brain, which is great for a couple of days. It's meant to heal the brain. But the prolonged exposure of those chemicals and free radicals and toxins in the brain over time start attacking the brain itself. And we have the research to show that. So now you have a brain, and then guess what? If the kid stays in sports, he's still keeping his brain inflamed. That's what happened to Mac. He was still wrestling. He was still playing football. He was still skiing and snowboarding. His brain never got a rest. No rest, no healing. And a lot of and on a subconcussive level, you don't even know that this stuff is going on. So that's the key point I wanted to make. There's 4 injuries to every concussion. I didn't know that. I hope you do now. Subconcussive trauma is the insidious form of concussive trauma. You cannot get away with this. Every kid that plays a contact sport is exposed to subconcussive trauma. There is nobody that can refute that. And it doesn't matter what you do. Head the ball, tackle, it doesn't matter. That is all subconcussive trauma. There's not a helmet. There's not any protection out there that can defend the brain against getting harmed by the prolonged exposure to this insidious form of trauma, mild TBIs. It's known to cause damage. Every research paper that I have looked at says subconcussive trauma is a risk. CDC, subconcussive trauma is a risk. The American Association for Athletic Trainers, subconcussive trauma is a definite risk. They all say, it needs more research. Well, I say, why don't we stop subconcussive trauma until the research is done? Because there is no doubt that subconcussive trauma, the continuous impacts, and the research now is now showing, since about 2015, more and more research is focused on white matter instead of CTE, and we're seeing the results, that there are changes to white matter, and that subconcussive trauma is the primary culprit behind the changes to that white matter. It's not the 1, 2, or 3 concussions that boys like Mac had. It's the continuous and relentless pounding of their brain that does not give it time to rest, that results in the damage that leads to mental illness, impulsivity, and possible suicide. So we need to understand subconcussive trauma as parents in order to educate ourselves to protect our kids. And if they play back-to-back sports like my boy, it's even worse. So we need to be aware of this. Go ahead, next slide, Doc. Now, when the subconcussive and concussive trauma takes place, at the cellular and microcellular level, you have damage to neurons, the whole part of the neuron. They break, they stretch, they leak. You know what happens when you strip the wire on a piece of insulation? Okay, your electrical signals get loose, they get blocked, they get impeded, they get mistransmitted, they get rerouted. The same thing happens in the brain. And this is the type of damage that over time becomes irreparable and or results in psychological disorders. And this is why we need to understand that that over time, the ability for the brain to heal itself from the damage that these neurons continuously take is very limited. It's very limited. It'll never get all the way back to where it's from. And so it's very important to understand that the damage that we're doing is not just a bruise. It's not just swelling. It's not just a headache, which I thought concussions were, man. I've had a number of them. You know, when Mac got his, like, all right, get him to the doctor. Let's take care of him. Doctor says good. Coach says good. All right, does he want to still play? All right, play, man. All right, I'm all about you. I'm coming to the wrestling match, okay? But this is not a headache. This is brain damage. And this is what we've got to push forward the parents, that, it's just not a headache anymore. This is irreparable, and it's harming the ability of our kids to achieve their their full potential. You'll get sick of me saying it, but I'm going to say it over and over again because I really don't care. Go ahead, Don, next slide. So Mac's brain, how does it relate to that? As I said, they didn't find CT in Mac's brain because, they found it in one 17-year-old that was the size of a quarter. So we didn't expect them to find it. But as I said, white matter changes were confirmed by Boston University just last month. They also stated that Mac's actions, the way he took his life, are symptomatic completely with other athletes diagnosed with CTE. It all comes together. Mac is just one example of what's happened in the hundreds, if not thousands, of children every year. In the anguish that this is causing, the third order effects, the pain, the grief, the unimaginable loss that happens every day for parents like me. And you find out it's avoidable. And this is why I have to be angry and move. I have to do something. And this is why I'm trying to talk to you so you can talk to others, because this doesn't need to happen at all. Next slide, Don. So in summary, when we expose the developing brain, a concussive and subconcussive trauma, we impact the brain structure that causes change in the white matter, which we have the research, the science, and the logic that's going to lead to cognitive and behavioral challenges. I mean, that's why that's the crux of everything that we're learning right now. So let's take it one step further. Go ahead, Don. And we're going to talk about the research. All right, that's out there. Look at you can read these titles. You don't have to be a doctor to read these articles and say, wow. And look at the dates. Okay, back in 2009, everything was focused on CT. 2015, 2016, man, I think there's white matter problems. How I came to the same conclusion, reading these papers that other researchers have come to, I mean, that's great, but at least I've got a loud mouth, and I'm going to speak for them, and I'm going to speak for parents, and I'm going to speak for kids. But the research is there. Everything that we're talking about, and this is just one page. We got dozens of these things. You want to wear yourself out? I will give you a folder of toilet reading that will take you 3 months, and I will make you, one of the most informed persons. Anybody wants to read it, man, you let me know. It's all on our website. Go ahead, Don. Next one. So now let's talk about the vulnerability, and then we'll close out while we're waiting to 14. So Lincoln illness with Lincoln mental illness with brain trauma is the focus of this whole conversation. Why are we concerned with this? Because CTE, they say, cannot be diagnosed till death. That's fine. I know that almost in every case of CTE, mental illness was diagnosed. Whether you're living in a van, whether you had schizophrenic or depression, whether you're abusing drugs or alcohol, I don't care. Every athlete that has taken their life, and a lot of athletes that are struggling right now, mental illness is an indicator. Well, if you're still alive, then we can leverage mental illness as a way to diagnose and look at kids that have had too much trauma. And right now, our psychological coaching, athletic community, parental communities, when kids have mental illness, we're thinking, it was a childhood incident. They saw some trauma. They were neglected. They were abused. Nobody is asking, do you play sports? My psychologist told me that she was sending her kids back to football because it meant so much to her. She didn't know that that's what probably put them in front of her in the first place. But mental illness is key, not because we just want to prevent it. It's because we can also identify kids that are suffering. It presents itself earlier than any other symptom of CTE. It can be diagnosed, it can be treated, and while they're alive. And it is prevalent in all stages of CTE, stages level 1, 2, and 3. But what's important, what drove me nuts, is that if I would have been able to recognize depression, Mac was apathetic, right? He just didn't want to do a lot of things. And I just thought he wanted to be a teenager. And I was like, all right. Then he didn't want to spend all kinds of time with the family. He'd like to play his game. So I just went down and played with him. I didn't like, he liked his room dark. I'm like, all right. And he slept a lot. And I'm like, all right. And, and talking to my friends, because I never had a boy, they was everybody sleeps, But he never gave us a reason to worry. Yet, those were all signs of depression. I missed that. So it's also important for us to get educated on the signs of mental illness so that we, as parents, can be aware it's not just a childhood act or some trauma or drugs that's involved. Our kids might be medicated because they're hurting. And it's so important to understand that mental illness can be an indicator of damage. But why even mess with this if it's preventable, right? I mean, if we wait till 14, then we could probably reduce some of the population of children and teenagers that are dealing with these issues right now, and the additional stress that is placing on families and loved ones, and the relationships between the athlete and those folks. It's horrible to watch. Next slide, Don. So where does this tie in with the damage? Well, we've got tons of research showing that damage to myelin. We talked about the transmission impedance of signals and how they get all wonky and the brain doesn't heal right. That that through exposure to subconcussive and concussive trauma, the myelin damage is highly correlated with severe psychological disorders and mental illness. Next slide, Don. And here's the research. I'm not making this up, folks. Okay, this stuff is out there for me to find and to cry over, to figure out, my God, man, I hurt my kid's brain. Why wasn't I smarter? Why didn't I know? Why didn't I dig deeper? Why didn't I do the research? Why did I let my boy down? This is all out there. So damaged myelin, which is researched over and over again, comes from trauma, is also tied to mental illness. Trauma from contact sports creates damaged myelin. That's tied to mental illness. A lot of the children that are with my boy at the Concussion Legacy Foundation all had mental disorders, all of them, okay? It's just a shame. It's just a shame that I've got to sit here talking about it. Next one, next slide, Don. Synaptic pruning impacts of trauma. What this comes down to is that if the brain is exposed to continuous subconcussive and concussive trauma, then cell death and the impact of that trauma is going to create a lower synaptic presence. When your son starts pruning and your daughter starts pruning, because don't get me wrong, we have females up there with my son. Okay, this is not a single sex problem. Okay, this impacts all of our children. I want to make that point. So when that brain starts to do synaptic pruning in order to wire itself more effectively, if there's less synapses to start with, it's going to prune them anyways. And now you get what's called aberrant synaptic pruning. And as I said, it's strongly associated with mental illness and psychological disorders. Next slide, Don. Here's some of the research. It's all out there. I mean, one of these papers I have goes back to 1984. That's the one I was talking about there. Next slide, Don. And then one more reason to wait, the prefrontal cortex. Okay, damaging that most critical component of your child's brain and of his future is what is eventually going to cause him or her the most problems. Next slide, Don. It is responsible for so much, and the research is there. The number one part of the brain that absorbs most of the trauma, if this is damaged while their brain's developing, the outcomes are severe. They just, it's there. This is where my boy suffered, you know, and this is what, and even if they don't get to the point where Mac was, okay, they're going to be less than what they could be. Why do we want to mess with our kids' future, their potential, their outcome, their contributions to our society, to our family, when it is all avoidable? There's not anybody on this call that loved my son, that or has somebody that's been impacted by this situation that doesn't wonder the same thing. Because we didn't know. We didn't know what we don't know, we don't know. And we'll address how we're going to change that next. Go ahead, Don. So Mac's brain, it wasn't until that video that Mac and he was admitted that he was suffering from schizophrenia and depression. Depression for 3 years, schizophrenia for 2. We found notes saying that Mac Parkman wants to die. They were hidden under his hats. That's why he wears baseball hats, right? They're hidden under his hats. I never searched his room because my boy was a good boy. He was never in trouble. I loved him. He hugged me every night. He hugged his mom. He kissed us. I kissed him every morning, every night. I had no reason to want my child wanted to die. I mean, that's why so many people showed up. But he wanted to go. And the way he took his life, his impulsivity, his apathy, they're all associated research we found linking brain damage to mental illness. And the identified white matter changes from Boston University link his brain to mental illness. And Mac is just one example of what's happening every day out there in America to unfortunate parents who love their children, who wanted everything for them, whose child are no longer there, yet they should be. And this is what we are trying to do. If I can't change it, I'm going to leave. I stopped a woman on a run this morning with a little 5-year-old on a bike and talked about this. And she goes, my son does triathlons. I gave her knuckles. I said, God bless you. You know, because I didn't know. And I'm not making excuses. I should have known. I feel I should have known. You're never going to get over the guilt. I had people tell me all the time, that was a great dad and all that. It don't matter. It don't matter now. It don't matter now. This whole is part of me forever. But I have to work with wonderful folks like you to help get the word out so that, you know, Mac's not forgotten. And our other kids are not forgotten that are at the Concussion Legacy Foundation and that work with other organizations that look at, you know, brain trauma and contact sports. There is a big community of researchers that are digging into this, man. And it's all coming out. If I got to be the voice, I'm going to be the voice. I mean, that's what God's job is, man. You watch. Next slide, Don. So now we're going to talk about and close out. I know I've eaten up an hour of your time. Why do we want to wait 14? Next slide. I'll tell you why we should wait 14. Because my boy should still be here. He should still be here. Everything that happened to my son was absolutely preventable and avoidable had I had been educated, had I been informed, had somebody just experienced this before me. Why did it have to be me? And I'm sure every parent asks themselves that. Why couldn't I have met somebody on the road of life that said, don't go there? Hell, I know I told the coach that I didn't want him paying. If he got one more concussion, he's gone, man. I'm done. But I had another one. You know, why? But it doesn't matter. Now I know, and I know that my son should still be here. So that's number one. Number two, we need to wait because our child's brains are not developed. I mean, how logical does this get? Look at the different things that are going on in your child's brain. And when do they end? Synaptogenesis, myelination, neurogenesis, pruning, 18 years, they're still going on. Why do we want to impact these processes? So that's another reason why do we need to wait. Because their brain ain't ready. And if their brain ain't ready and it's damaged, it's not going to do them justice as an adult. And it is our job as parents to do the best job we can to protect them. We'll talk about that in a little bit later on. And then we have societal problems related to concussive trauma. We have coaches that think boys need to be men. They're boys. You want to turn boys into men, you send them to me. I'm a Green Beret Sergeant Major. I turn boys into men. Right now, we got to let boys be boys and girls be girls and let them focus on being good kids. But the big problem, there's several problems here, is that we as a society are not aware of trauma, or the impact of trauma on the developing brain. And so we don't look for it. We don't look at, aggregate concussive trauma. We don't look at subconcussive trauma. And so we're not tracking on this as parents, doctors, psychologists, the cult, the people that we count on most for our kids, doctors, coaches, athletic trainers, caregivers, are not informed. And if they're not informed, these are people we trust. Why? We're parents. They're the pros. They don't even know this. And most of them will readily admit it. And then, of course, when it comes to aggregate concussive trauma, multiple sports, if you get a concussion, the doctor never asks you, how many sports have you been playing? How long have you been playing this sport? How many concussions have you had? Why? Because we travel, we move as families. Our medical records are all over the place. There's no history of concussions. And a lot of times our kids just don't tell the truth, right? Because they want to play. And only we can sit on top of them. And then they're not, on top of being able to identify if you had too much trauma, they're not trained to associate mental illness with it. So your children, which are showing mental disorders as a result of concussive sports, are not being treated for it. They're treating them for the mental illness. They give them a bunch of drugs, they give them some therapy, but they're not treating the problem, which is their damaged brain. And that is what we need to do, educate and aware and make aware. We are a community. Everybody has their part to play. If we are not educated, how do we help our kids? They're hurt. Okay? And then now we're seeing, my last point there about the known associations between white matter changes and mental illness really are not associated with sports and CTE. That's what we're trying to change. We're trying to get the word out, the research. Dr. McKee, Kristen Lewinsky, Lisa Mahale, Sheila Stern, the American Brain Coalition have been amazing in listening to us. And helping us get the word out as it needs to be. Next slide, Doc. More reason to wait. Okay. We talked about the critical functions. We want them to be optimal as a child. There's tons of sports that they could play. Just let them be kids. I was so worried about my son having a gaming thing in his hand. Man, I wish he's still game. I mean, he's still game, but I wish I wasn't, so happy when he wanted to play these happy sports. I mean, he played soccer. He was a great goalie. He could kick that ball all the way down the other field and score goals. All the other teams were afraid of him. But the other problem that we have is that our doctors cannot accurately diagnose the severity of concussions. Why? Because you cannot see into the brain. You can't touch it. It's not a broken leg. It's not a broken arm. You cannot see this damage. It's at the cellular level, the microcellular level. The technologies, you go into a crowded emergency room where there's stab victims and heart attacks and COVID and all this stuff. Who the hell is going to focus on your kid and their concussive history past and spend the time to determine if they're damaging their white matter? And the technology is not readily available. So we have another problem is that nobody's telling us to stop because they can't. They can't tell us that your kid's hurting. All we can do is make the research and knowledge and logic available for parents to say, you're done, buddy. You're done. I'm sorry. When you're 14, we'll talk about it. Till then, look at that soccer ball, man. And you hit it, I'll kill you, right? I mean, we got it. We're so good at sitting on our kids with dope and drugs and driving straight and getting off the phone, texting, all that. But we're not good when it comes to subconcussive trauma because we lack the awareness. Next page, Doc. And the research is there over and over. And these are all new research papers. Okay? Everything's there to support our premise on this and that you are so lovingly supporting. Okay? Everything that we're talking about is documented. When you read the book, we've got footnotes for everything. I'm not making this up. I am a grieving dad. But I'm not a grieving dad that's out there just talking smack to get somebody to pay attention to me. Okay? I'm a grieving dad who's angry because I found out that my son should still be here. I found out that there's knowledge out there that would have helped me make better decisions. But now I have to do something. I have to let people know, and that's what the Mac Parkman Foundation is going to do. Go ahead and slide down. And why else is this going to change? We're seeing, significant declines in participation in tackle football. We also know that, when U.S. hockey and U.S. soccer went to no check and no head, participation went up by 30%. That was in Julie Stam's book. But remember, 20, 30 years ago, what was a seatbelt? Would you wear a helmet when you're on your bike? No. My mother and dad used to roll up the windows and smoke 2 packs of Marlboros taking me to school. You could ride in the back of pickup trucks for miles and miles, and nobody wore a helmet with a ski. Well, you think all that stuff takes place now? No. Why? Because we're educated, because we're aware, because we know better. Next slide, Don. And now this is where we're going. It's time for one more change. We're asking schools, PTA, the sports leagues, parents primarily, especially moms, because nobody goes to the mat for their kid better than Mama Grizzly Bear. And I want all of them to hear about this because I've seen some angry women. They're like, you tell me what? I'm going to beat his ass, right? And I've run into one mom who's actually pro tackle, and then she listens to me, she goes, you got me. And she took a Mac Parkman Foundation, and she went right to the website. But we want to try to eliminate the risk of brain damage and mental illness from contact sports. It could also save their lives. And that's why, we appreciate you taking the time today to talk to us. And as an example, what we're doing, next slide, Don. We went to my son's school, CSCS, and we asked them, would you consider the following? And now they're still considering it, and I'm hoping they make the right decision. But these are some of the issues, the logical things we asked them to do. Get rid of your middle school football team. Okay? Eliminate back-to-back concussive sports. My son rode from football right into wrestling. Okay? Update. Do you know that most concussive material for parents has no reference to subconcussive trauma and the potential impacts on their child? Our athletic trainer and the school superintendent received the same briefing. The athletic trainer, you know what she said? She said there's not anything in the slideshow that any athletic trainer would disagree with. Okay? Impact testing. It wasn't something that our school did. They're taking into consideration $5 a season to test a child. Okay? And then lead. Schools can lead. They can make decisions and say, this is what we're doing for our children. So we really think that we're hopefully, CSCS is considering this, and we're going to be going after any school district. You want me to give this presentation to anybody in America, you call me up. And I will be there for you, for your child, for your school, for your sports team, and I will do everything I can to go ahead and get them to understand what we're doing with our kids and to help them change their minds. Next slide, Don. So in summary, I want to say thank you so much for listening to me and being able to record this webinar. It's been a very, very hard journey. And while I understand that my son is no longer here, I also have to be amazingly thankful for the 17 wonderful years I had with him. And if that's all I have is enough, And now I have this mission to work with you to help spread the word, because this is for real, folks. This ain't just, I'm not making this stuff up. I was able to find all this up, and I just feel empowered, or not empowered. I just feel obligated to help parents. Every time I talk to a parent and I see their eyes go wide, and they say, your son did what? And oh my God, I mean, I didn't know. And oh, you're not playing that damn sport, people don't know. Out of 1,000 people, I think I run into maybe 10 that said, oh, my kid ain't playing that sport. And guess what? They're all doctors and neurologists. They know, right? Now I'm a soldier. I just wanted to be a good dad. And my boy wanted to play. And I know your kids wanted to play. And I know we want to support our kids. We want to give, gosh, man, the love that a parent has for a child is the absolute most uncompromising love in the world. There's nothing we don't do for our kids. But there's also things that we should not let them do. And we didn't know that. So now we know now. So I thank you so much, not just me, my entire family, Perry, Allie, and Andy, the foundation, Suzanne, Don Fry that took this over, the amazing, Travis, who's helping us with the PR side, the Concussion Legacy Foundation, Boston University, Dr. Ann McKee, the Patrick Risha Foundation, Challenge 38, all of our partners, the American Brain Council, Mission Matters, just gave us a big blow up in their new book in the introduction on talking about how they didn't even know this was a problem with our society today. Folks, it just makes sense. It's not necessary, and it needs to end. So please, if you get a chance, help us spread the word. We'll send you posters. We'll send you bracelets. We'll send you discounts on the books, because it's not about the money. God's been so good to us. It's about what we're getting the word out. So let us know what we can do. You're now informed. You're now empowered. We're going to have an ambassador program. You'll have this presentation. We'll keep making it better. We'll send you books, or we'll send you the QR codes for the thing, anything to get the words out. Every child that doesn't put on a helmet or heads a soccer ball until they're in high school is a child saved. And a parent that's going to tell this to their kids and their grandparents. There's nothing wrong with contact sports. I do believe that there's been a lot of, I think this knowledge shouldn't be coming from me. It should be coming from our national foundation, CDC, NIH. It should be coming from our government. It should be coming from anything. But I will reach out to every parental organization, mommy organization, PTA, everything. And we will be relentless with your help to spread the word. Thank you so much. God bless you all. And we look forward to working with all of you again. And I got my boys stuff back there. It was time to put on Mr. Me6, man. And I remember my boy every day, dude. I mean, God, I miss him. This whole room, I got all this stuff up here: football shirts, helmets, and not a day goes by that I'll miss my Mac. And I knew there's a lot of you and my wonderful family. So, anyway, thank you so much, Don. What are the next steps? Because I've never
opened it up. We've still got a great attendance. You guys stuck with this for the whole presentation, and it's just powerful to watch, and I can't wait to get it out there further. But anybody, let's open it up for questions. We don't have anything right now. It's a lot to absorb and take in, but let's open up. Anybody got any questions before we break?
When you're drinking a beer. That's a good question.
It's 6 o'clock somewhere, right? That's what.
Yeah. Well, Don, I just so let them know. Please tell them how, where they can find this. So if they find friends, if somebody wants to listen to the recording, they can go ahead and do so.
Yeah, we'll do a follow up here. This is recorded, like we mentioned, and it'll be posted online and allows us to get it out there further. We'll probably do some more of these lives down the road with some guests. We do have a great podcast. We invite you guys to start poking around there. And we're going to do an email follow-up to all the attendees and registrants here as well, with a link to the ebook, which is going to open up shortly. As soon as we fix some technical things, probably in the next day or two, you'll have access to the book. We'd appreciate some reviews there. And just
blurbs, make you famous.
That's right. Blurbs and reviews. But help us get the word out is the biggest message. Thank you, Shampa Rice, Bruce, giving the message down there. Was not aware. She loves you and your wife. And
it's awesome. And then, by the way, gang, to augment what Don just said, that book has already been reviewed by some of the most amazing neurologist minds in the country, and they all agree that this needs to get out, and that the book is a good forum. It's written by a parent for parents, and they're going to help us all they can. So we look forward to your support.
Deb Delpha, thanking you. Ryan McLaughlin, going to help spread the word. We saw Cliff earlier as well. Without any questions, we can wrap and end the session. And
it's all good, man. Well, yeah, Jay Cruzy, love you, man. Love you, dude. And you're in Florida now. We're linking up. I'll be reaching out. All right, Don, thanks so much for putting this together, man.
We'll talk to you soon. Take care.
Love you, man.